Picture this. It's 3 in the morning on May 13th, 1862. A 23-year-old enslaved man stands at the wheel of a Confederate warship loaded with weapons and ammunition. Behind him, hidden below deck, are 15 people, including his wife, his 4-year-old daughter, his infant son, and 12 others who've bet everything on his plan. Ahead of him, 5 Confederate forts bristling with cannons, each one manned by soldiers who'll blow him out of the water if they suspect anything. One wrong signal, one missed gesture, one moment of hesitation, and everyone he loves dies. But Robert Smalls doesn't hesitate. He puts on a straw hat, mimics the captain's posture, and steers straight toward Fort Sumter. Within 2 hours, he'll go from enslaved pilot to Union war hero. Within 3 years, he'll own the house where he was born a slave. Within 12 years, he'll be sitting in the United States Congress. But here's what I want you to think about as we go through this story. How does someone with absolutely no formal education, no legal rights, no freedom, and no resources outsmart an entire military system designed to keep him in chains? Stay until the end, because the answer reveals something about human potential that'll change how you see your own obstacles. Let's go back to where it started. Beaufort, South Carolina, 1839. Robert Smalls is born in a small wooden cabin behind a house at 511 Prince Street. His mother, Lydia Polite, works as a house servant for Henry McKee, the man who owns them both. Think about what that means. From his first breath, Robert belongs to someone else. His time isn't his body isn't his future isn't his. He grows up watching his mother serve in McKee's house, learning early that the world is divided into people who own and people who are owned. But here's something crucial about young Robert. He's watching everything. He's noticing how things work. He's studying the patterns of power and control around him. Even as a child, his mind is mapping the system that holds him. When Robert turns 12, McKee makes a decision that'll accidentally change everything. He sends the boy to Charleston to be hired out. McKee probably thinks he's just maximizing his investment, getting some rental income from his human property. But what he's actually doing is giving Robert Smalls the education that'll eventually destroy the system that enslaved him. Charleston in 1851 is one of the busiest ports in the South. Ships coming and going constantly, cotton and rice flowing out, goods flowing in. And the whole operation depends on enslaved labor, including the skilled pilots who navigate the tricky waters of Charleston Harbor. Robert gets hired out to work on the docks and on ships. At first, he's doing basic labor, loading cargo, coiling ropes, scrubbing decks, but he's got something that sets him apart. An almost supernatural ability to read water, to understand tides and currents and the personality of boats. The older pilots notice. They start teaching him, not formally because there's nothing formal about the education of an enslaved person, but they show him how to read the water's surface to know what's underneath, how to feel a ship's response to the helm, how to memorize landmarks and use them for navigation, how to judge distances and depths by eye. And Robert soaks it all up like a sponge. He's learning the technical skills of piloting, but he's also learning something else. He's learning the geography of power. He sees which white men give orders and which ones follow. He notices who checks paperwork carefully and who waves ships through without looking. He observes that Confederate military operations run on routine and assumption. People see what they expect to see. Ships that look right and give the right signals don't get questioned. He's not consciously planning an escape yet. He's just a teenager trying to survive and maybe make himself valuable enough to avoid being sold away from his mother. But his mind is filing away every detail, every pattern, every weakness in the system. By his late teens, Robert has become one of the most skilled pilots in Charleston Harbor. Shipowners request him specifically. He knows every channel, every sandbar, every current. He can navigate in fog, at night, in storms. He understands how the tide affects different parts of the harbor at different times. He knows where the deep water is and where the shallows will rip the bottom out of a ship. This knowledge makes him valuable, and valuable enslaved people get treated slightly better than others. Not well, not fairly, but slightly better, and that slight difference gives him a tiny bit of room to maneuver. He's also learning the Confederate military's security procedures from the inside. Charleston Harbor is one of the most heavily fortified positions in the South. 5 major forts guard the entrance. Fort Sumter sits on an artificial island right in the main channel. Fort Moultrie guards the northern approach. Castle Pinckney, Fort Johnson, and Fort Ripley cover other angles. Every ship entering or leaving has to pass at least one fort, usually several. And the Confederates have developed an elaborate system of signals to identify friendly vessels. 3 long whistle blasts mean friendly vessel passing. Specific flag configurations mean specific things. Officers use hand gestures at checkpoints. And Robert Smalls, piloting ships in and out of the harbor day after day, learns all of it. He memorizes which forts are most alert and which ones are more relaxed. He notices that the sentries get tired late at night. He observes that if you look like you belong, if you give the right signals with confidence, people don't question you. In 1856, when he's 17, Robert meets Hannah Jones. She's enslaved by a man named Samuel Kingsman. She already has a daughter, Clara, from a previous relationship. Robert and Hannah fall in love, and here's where you see the impossible cruelty of the system. They want to get married, but they can't legally marry because enslaved people have no legal rights. They want to build a life together, but they don't own their own lives. They want to have children, but those children will be born into slavery, owned by someone else from birth. They go ahead anyway. They marry in whatever way they can, probably with a ceremony in the enslaved community that has no legal standing but means everything to them. They start building a family against all odds. Hannah already has Clara, who's about 7 years old when Robert comes into their lives. Then they have Elizabeth, who they call Lydia after Robert's mother. Then they have Robert Jr., and Robert Smalls looks at his children and makes a decision that'll define everything that follows. He refuses to accept that this is how their story ends. He starts saving money. As a skilled pilot, he's allowed to keep a tiny portion of what he earns, with most going to McKee. It's not much, but he saves every penny he can. According to records from the Beaufort County Historical Society, he tries to buy his family's freedom. He approaches Samuel Kingsman and offers to purchase Hannah and the children. Kingsman sets a price, $800. It's a fortune, more than Robert can possibly save in any reasonable time, but he tries. He keeps working, keeps saving, keeps hoping that somehow he can buy his way to freedom. But as the 1850s wear on, the political situation is getting worse, not better. The conflict between North and South over slavery is intensifying. South Carolina is becoming more militant, more defensive of slavery, more hostile to any suggestion of emancipation. And Robert Smalls realizes something that changes his entire approach. He's not going to be able to buy his family's freedom. The system isn't going to let him out. If he wants freedom, he's going to have to take it. By 1861, the Civil War has started. South Carolina has seceded from the Union. Charleston Harbor becomes a crucial Confederate military position. And Robert Smalls is now the pilot of the CSS Planter, a 147-foot armed transport steamer. The Planter is owned by a man named Ferguson, who's leased it to the Confederate military. It's armed with a 32-pound pivot gun and a 24-pound howitzer. Its job is to move weapons, ammunition, and supplies between Confederate positions around Charleston Harbor. Which means Robert Smalls has access to everything. He knows which forts are well defended and which aren't. He knows the signal codes. He knows the patrol schedules. He knows exactly what cargo the Planter is carrying on any given day. He knows the locations of underwater mines the Confederates have placed in the harbor. He knows which channels are safe and which ones will blow a ship to pieces. And he's watching the white officers who command the ship. The captain is a man named Charles Relier. There are 2 white mates. Robert observes their habits, where they go at night, when they're on board and when they're not. He notices that Relier often wears a distinctive straw hat. He's been gathering intelligence for 10 years, and now he's going to use it. Spring of 1862, Robert starts talking to the other enslaved crew members of the Planter. There are 8 others. Alfred Gordine, Abraham Jackson, Abraham Alston, William Morrison, Gabriel Turno, Samuel Chisholm, John Small, and Robert's younger brother, John Smalls. He doesn't approach them all at once. That would be too risky. He starts with the people he trusts most, his brother John, then Alfred Gordine, who's been working with him for years. One by one, he brings them into the plan. And the plan is audacious to the point of insanity. They're going to steal a Confederate warship, sail it past 5 Confederate forts in the middle of the night, and deliver it to the Union Navy blockade fleet waiting outside the harbor. If they succeed, they'll be free. If they fail, they'll be executed as traitors and thieves. Every single person will die. The Confederacy doesn't show mercy to enslaved people who rebel. They make examples of them, public executions designed to terrorize anyone else who might think about resistance. But here's the thing that separates Robert Smalls from almost anyone else in his position. He doesn't just want to save himself. He wants to save his family. He tells Hannah the plan. Can you imagine that conversation? He's telling his wife that he wants to steal a Confederate warship with their children on board. If anything goes wrong, their 4-year-old daughter and infant son will die. Most people would say no, the risk is too high. Staying enslaved is also a risk. Their children will grow up in chains, their son will be sold away from them, their daughter will face horrors they can't protect her from. The system they're living under offers no safety, no future, no hope. They're going to bring the women and children, all of them. Hannah, little Lydia, who's 4 years old, baby Robert Jr., Hannah's daughter Clara, who's about 10, and the families of the other crew members. 16 people total. Most escape plans prioritize speed and stealth. You move fast, you move light, you leave everything behind. Robert Smalls says no. We all go together or we don't go at all. The planning is meticulous. They can't just steal the ship and run. They have to get past 5 Confederate forts, each one capable of sinking them with a single cannon shot. Robert has to time everything perfectly. They need to leave when the tide is right. They need to pass each fort at a time when the sentries are least alert. They need to have the correct signals ready. They need to look completely normal, completely routine, completely unremarkable. One detail out of place and they're dead. May 12, 1862. The planter is docked at a wharf in Charleston, right in front of the Confederate commander's office. The ship is loaded with weapons and ammunition destined for Confederate forts. 4 large guns, ammunition, and other military supplies. The captain and his 2 white officers decide to spend the night ashore, which is against regulations, but they do it anyway. They're confident. Why wouldn't they be? The crew is enslaved. Enslaved people don't steal warships. The idea is unthinkable. This is the moment. Robert gathers the crew. They wait until the city is asleep. At 3 in the morning, they fire up the planter's engines. The sound echoes across the water, but no one stops them because the planter leaving the dock is a familiar sight. Confederate ships move at all hours. Robert steers the boat to a different wharf where Hannah and the other families are waiting. They come aboard in darkness. 16 people, including small children who have to stay absolutely silent. One cry, one sound, and Confederate soldiers will investigate. Think about what Hannah is doing right now. She's bringing her children onto a stolen warship in the middle of the night, knowing that if anything goes wrong, they'll all be killed. She has to keep 4-year-old Lydia quiet. She has to keep baby Robert from crying. She has to trust that her husband knows what he's doing. The women and children hide below deck. Robert puts on that straw hat, the one like Captain Relia wears. He stands at the wheel and he steers the planter toward the harbor mouth. Now comes the part that should be impossible. Between the planter and Freedom are 5 Confederate forts. Each one is expecting the planter to pass, but each one is also on high alert for Union attack. The sentries have orders to fire on any vessel that doesn't give the correct signals. Robert has to get every single signal exactly right at every single checkpoint. One mistake and the cannons open fire. At 4:15 in the morning, fighting the tide, the planter approaches Fort Sumter. This is the most dangerous moment. Fort Sumter is the most heavily armed position in the harbor. It's where the Civil War started just over a year ago. It's a symbol of Confederate defiance, and it's got enough firepower to reduce the planter to splinters in seconds. Robert can see the sentries on the parapet. He pulls the whistle cord. 3 long, shrill blasts, the signal for friendly vessel. He stands in the captain's posture, wearing the captain's hat, giving the captain's hand gestures. Dawn is just starting to break. There's enough light that the sentries can see the ship clearly. The sentries look down at the planter. They see what they expect to see. A familiar ship, the correct signals, a figure in a straw hat at the wheel. They wave the planter through. Robert Smalls has just bluffed his way past the most fortified position in Charleston Harbor with his entire family hidden below deck, but he can't celebrate yet. He can't even show relief. He has to maintain the captain's posture, the captain's confidence. Any sign of nervousness and someone might look closer. There are 4 more forts ahead. He navigates past each one, giving the correct signals, maintaining the captain's posture, never showing a hint of nervousness. At each checkpoint, he's thinking about his children below deck. If the cannons fire, they'll die first. They're in the most vulnerable part of the ship. But he can't think about that. He has to focus on the signals, the timing, the performance. The planter moves through Confederate-controlled waters like it belongs there, because as far as anyone watching can tell, it does. Finally, they clear the last fort. They're in open water. The Union blockade fleet is ahead. And now Robert has a different problem. The Union ships don't know the planter is friendly. They see a Confederate warship approaching, and they're preparing to fire. Robert has thought of this too. The crew hauls down the Confederate flag and runs up a white bedsheet as a surrender flag. But they're still not safe. Union ships have been tricked before by Confederate vessels flying false flags. The USS Onward, a Union ship, is tracking them with its guns. They're close enough now that Union sailors can see them clearly. They can see that the crew is black. They can see the white flag. They can see women and children on deck now because Robert has brought them up where they can be seen. The Onward holds fire and signals the planter to come alongside. Robert Smalls pulls up to the Union vessel. A Union officer comes aboard, probably expecting to find Confederate prisoners or a captured ship. Instead, he finds Robert Smalls, who delivers one of the greatest understatements in military history. He says, "I thought the planter might be of some use to Uncle Sam." Let's stop and think about what he just pulled off. Robert Smalls has delivered to the Union Navy a fully armed Confederate warship loaded with weapons and ammunition. But that's not even the most valuable thing he's brought. He's also carrying Confederate signal code books. The secret codes for reading Confederate flag signals, detailed knowledge of every defensive position in Charleston Harbor, information about which forts are well defended and which are vulnerable, where the mines are placed in the harbor, where the weak points are in the Confederate defenses, where the Confederates are planning to build new fortifications. Admiral Samuel Francis DuPont, the Union commander of the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, interviews Robert and is stunned. According to DuPont's official report to the Navy Department, he writes that Smalls is superior to any who has yet come into lines, intelligent as many of them have been. His information has been most valuable. The Union Navy has just gained an intelligence asset worth more than a dozen ships, and they've gained it from a man who, according to Confederate law, is property, not a person. The story explodes across the North. Newspapers run headlines about the enslaved pilot who stole a Confederate warship. Harper's Weekly publishes an illustration of Robert Smalls. The New York Tribune calls it one of the most daring and heroic adventures since the war commenced. Congress votes to give Robert Smalls and his crew prize money for capturing the planter. The amount is $1,500, which is a fortune in 1862. But more importantly, Robert Smalls and his family are free. After 23 years of slavery, he's a free man. His wife is free, his children are free. But Robert isn't done serving. He volunteers to stay with the Union Navy. He knows Charleston Harbor better than almost anyone alive, and the Union needs that knowledge. They make him pilot of the planter, now the USS Planter. He's guiding Union ships through the same waters he navigated as an enslaved man. He's using his knowledge of Confederate defenses to help the Union plan attacks. He's pointing out where the mines are, where the weak spots are, where the Confederates are vulnerable. For the next 3 years, Robert Smalls serves as pilot of the planter. He participates in 17 military engagements. He guides Union ships through dangerous waters. He provides intelligence that helps the Union capture Confederate positions. And in April 1863, something happens that shows you exactly who Robert Smalls is. The planter is on a mission near Charleston. They come under heavy Confederate fire. Shells are exploding around them. The white captain, a man named Nickerson, panics. He wants to surrender. He's ready to give up the ship. But Robert Smalls refuses. He's not going back to slavery. He's not letting his crew go back to slavery. He takes command. He maneuvers the ship out of danger. He saves everyone aboard. When they get back to the Union fleet, Admiral DuPont hears what happened. He removes Captain Nickerson from command, and he promotes Robert Smalls to captain of the planter. Think about that. 3 years earlier, Robert was enslaved. Now he's the captain of a United States vessel. He's the first black captain in the service of the United States. He's commanding the same ship he once piloted as someone else's property. His crew, many of them formerly enslaved, are now serving under a black captain. The transformation is almost unbelievable. But Robert Smalls is thinking bigger than just military service. In 1863, while he's still serving in the Navy, he does something that's both practical and deeply symbolic. Remember that house at 511 Prince Street in Beaufort, the house where he was born enslaved, the house with the small cabin out back where he spent his childhood, Henry McKee's house? Union forces have seized it for unpaid taxes. It goes up for auction. Robert Smalls buys it. He uses part of his prize money from capturing the planter. He purchases the house where he was born, a slave. And then he moves his mother into it. Lydia Polite, who spent decades serving in that house as an enslaved woman, now lives there as a free woman in her son's house. The man who owned them is in financial ruin. The people he owned now own his house. Buying that house wasn't just a real estate deal. He was reclaiming the exact spot where his oppression began and transforming it into a monument of freedom. Robert continues serving in the Navy until the war ends in 1865. The Confederacy is defeated. 4 million enslaved people are suddenly free, including everyone Robert Smalls helped escape. But freedom on paper doesn't automatically mean freedom in reality. The South is devastated. The entire economic and social system was built on slavery, and now that system is gone. What comes next? This is where Robert Smalls makes his next transformation. In 1868, he's elected as a delegate to the South Carolina Constitutional Convention. This is the convention that's going to write a new constitution for South Carolina, one that has to account for the fact that black people are now citizens with rights. Robert Smalls helps write that constitution. He's in the room where they're literally rewriting the rules of society. And he doesn't just participate, he leads. He introduces legislation to create the South Carolina Land Commission, which is designed to help formerly enslaved people buy land. Think about what this means. For generations, enslaved people couldn't own property. Now Robert Smalls is creating a system to help them become landowners. He's trying to give them economic independence, because he understands that political freedom without economic power is incomplete. He also authors the bill that creates the first free and compulsory public school system in South Carolina. A man who never had access to formal education is creating a system to ensure every child in South Carolina can go to school for free, black children and white children. He's not just changing his own life, he's changing the structure of opportunity for everyone who comes after him. In 1868, he's elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. He's now a state legislator. He's making laws, he's voting on budgets, he's shaping policy, and he's doing it as a black man in a state that, just 6 years earlier, would have executed him for learning to read. In 1870, he's elected to the South Carolina State Senate. He's moving up, gaining influence, building coalitions. But Robert Smalls isn't satisfied with state politics. In 1874, he runs for the United States House of Representatives, and he wins. Robert Smalls, born enslaved in 1839, is now Congressman Robert Smalls, representing South Carolina's 5th District in Washington, D.C. He's 45 years old. He's gone from enslaved pilot to United States Congressman in 12 years. He serves 5 terms in Congress. 5 terms, that's a decade of service in the United States Congress. He's not a token or a symbol. He's a working congressman who introduces legislation, serves on committees, and fights for his constituents. He serves on the Committee on Agriculture. He advocates for the Port Royal Naval Station in South Carolina, which brings jobs and economic development to his district. He fights for education funding. He pushes for enforcement of civil rights laws. He speaks on the House floor about the violence and intimidation that black voters face in the South. In 1876, during his 2nd term, he gives a powerful speech on the House floor. He's responding to white Southern congressmen who are claiming that black people aren't capable of self-government. Robert Smalls stands up and says, "My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be equal of any people, anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life." If this story of transforming systematic oppression into political power inspires you, share this video to help others discover what's possible when courage meets strategic brilliance. But here's where the story gets harder, because while Robert Smalls is in Congress fighting for civil rights and equality, South Carolina is changing. Reconstruction is collapsing. White supremacist groups are rising. The Ku Klux Klan is terrorizing black voters and white Republicans. Federal troops that had been protecting black citizens are being withdrawn. The political coalition that brought Robert Smalls to power is being systematically destroyed through violence and intimidation. And then comes 1876 and the Red Shirts. The Red Shirts are a paramilitary group led by a man named Benjamin Tillman. Their goal is simple: take back political power by any means necessary. During the 1876 election, they launch a campaign of terror. In one incident in Hamburg, South Carolina, Red Shirts attack a black militia unit. They kill 5 black men in cold blood. They execute them after they've surrendered. In Ellenton, South Carolina, Red Shirts massacre dozens of black citizens. They're not hiding what they're doing. They're doing it openly, daring anyone to stop them. Robert Smalls sees this happening in his own district. He sees black voters being driven from polling places. He sees families terrorized in their homes. He sees the progress of Reconstruction being reversed through violence. And it works. The violence suppresses enough black votes that Democrats claim victory in South Carolina. The biracial Republican governments that Robert Smalls helped build start to fall apart. Federal support disappears after Democrats win congressional elections in 1874. The promise of Reconstruction is dying. President Hayes makes a deal with Southern Democrats in 1877. Federal troops are withdrawn from the South. The protection that black citizens had is gone. Robert Smalls watches the world he helped create being torn down by violence. But he keeps fighting. He wins re-election to Congress in 1878, 1880, and 1882. But each election is harder than the last. The violence and intimidation are getting worse. In 1886, he loses his seat. He contests the election, claiming voter fraud and intimidation, which is absolutely true. The House of Representatives investigates and agrees with him. They seat him in Congress in 1887, but it's his last term. The system of white supremacy is reasserting itself, and even Robert Smalls can't hold it back alone. In 1895, he's a delegate to another South Carolina Constitutional Convention, but this one has a very different purpose. This convention is designed to disenfranchise black voters legally, to write into the state constitution rules that'll prevent black people from voting without technically violating the 15th Amendment. Robert Smalls stands up at that convention and delivers an impassioned speech. He argues that his race needs no special defense, that the past history of black people in America proves them to be equal of any people anywhere. He warns that the laws they're passing will come back to haunt South Carolina. He says that one day, poor white people will also be disenfranchised by these same laws. But he loses. The convention passes laws requiring literacy tests, poll taxes, and property requirements that are specifically designed to prevent black people from voting. Within a few years, black voter registration in South Carolina drops from over 90% to almost nothing. Everything Robert Smalls fought for in Congress is being systematically dismantled. But here's what's remarkable. Robert Smalls doesn't give up. He doesn't retreat into bitterness or despair. In 1889, President Benjamin Harrison appoints him Collector of Customs for the port of Beaufort. It's a federal patronage position, which means he holds it as long as Republicans control the White House. It's a powerful position. He's responsible for collecting tariffs and duties on all goods coming through Beaufort's port. He's supervising staff. He's managing revenue. He's using that position to maintain influence in his community, to provide stability for black families in Beaufort, to be a living example that the transformation he represents is real and lasting. He loses the position from 1893 to 1897 when Democrats win the presidency, but he gets it back when Republicans return to power. He holds that position until 1913. That's 24 years of federal service after leaving Congress. During those years, he's helping black families navigate the increasingly hostile Jim Crow system. He's using his influence to protect people where he can. He's maintaining connections with the Republican Party nationally. He's staying engaged, staying visible, staying active in the community. He also starts publishing a local newspaper. He's using it to advocate for black rights, to document the injustices of Jim Crow, to keep the memory of Reconstruction alive. He's living in that house at 511 Prince Street with his mother until she dies. He's become one of Beaufort's most respected leaders, even as the laws are designed to push black people into second-class citizenship. But he's also watching the world change around him in ways that must be heartbreaking. Jim Crow laws are spreading across the South. Segregation is becoming legally enforced. The Supreme Court has upheld separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. The brief window of possibility that opened after the Civil War is closing. Black people are being written out of the political system. The schools that Robert Smalls helped create are being segregated and underfunded. The land commission he helped establish is being dismantled. The voting rights he fought for are being stripped away. And yet Robert Smalls keeps going. He keeps serving. He keeps fighting in whatever ways are still available to him. He's in his 70s now, and his health is declining. He's suffering from malaria, which he probably contracted during his years piloting ships through the swamps and marshes around Charleston. He's got diabetes, but he's still active in his community. He's still respected. Still a symbol of what was possible during Reconstruction and what might be possible again someday. February 23rd, 1915. Robert Smalls is 75 years old. He's sitting on the porch of 511 Prince Street, the house where he was born enslaved, the house he's owned for 51 years. And on that porch, in that house, Robert Smalls dies. His funeral is the largest in Beaufort's history. Thousands of people come to pay their respects, black and white. People who remember what he did during the war, people who remember his service in Congress, people whose lives he touched during his decades of community service. He's buried at Tabernacle Baptist Church in downtown Beaufort. The man who was born with no rights, no freedom, and no future is mourned as one of the most important figures in South Carolina history. But here's what happens next, and this is crucial to understanding the full arc of this story. Robert Smalls' story gets forgotten, not immediately, but gradually. As Jim Crow tightens its grip on the South, as white supremacy reasserts itself, as the narrative of the lost cause takes hold, stories like Robert Smalls' become inconvenient. They don't fit the story that white Southerners want to tell about the Civil War and Reconstruction. The lost cause narrative says that slavery wasn't that bad, that enslaved people were happy, that Reconstruction was a disaster of corruption and incompetence. Robert Smalls' story contradicts all of that. He was enslaved and he risked everything to escape. He was brilliant and strategic. He served honorably in Congress. So his story gets minimized, overlooked, erased from textbooks and public memory. For decades, Robert Smalls is barely remembered outside of Beaufort. The man who stole a Confederate warship, who became a Union captain, who served 5 terms in Congress, becomes a footnote. His house at 511 Prince Street stays in his family, but the broader world forgets who he was and what he did. Historians writing about the Civil War mention him briefly, if at all. Textbooks skip over him. The narrative of American history is written in a way that leaves him out. It's only in recent decades that historians have started to recover his story and recognize its full significance. Scholars like Edward Miller Jr., who wrote a comprehensive biography of Smalls, have documented his life in detail. The Beaufort County Historical Society has preserved his house and turned it into a historical site. Historians of Reconstruction have recognized him as one of the most important black political leaders of the era. And that recovery matters, because Robert Smalls' story isn't just about one man's extraordinary courage and intelligence. It's about what becomes possible when someone refuses to accept the limitations that society places on them. So let's come back to that question I asked at the beginning. Remember that question. How does someone with no formal education, no legal rights, no freedom, and no resources outsmart an entire military system designed to keep him in chains? Here's the answer, and it's not what you might expect. Robert Smalls didn't outsmart the system through some kind of superhuman genius or lucky break. He did it through 3 things that anyone can develop. First, patient observation. He spent 10 years learning everything he could about Charleston Harbor, about Confederate military procedures, about the patterns and habits of the people who held power over him. He didn't just react to his circumstances, he studied them. He turned his oppression into an education. Every day he was enslaved was a day he was gathering intelligence that he'd eventually use to free himself and 15 others. Second, strategic courage. Robert Smalls didn't just take a wild risk. He calculated the odds. He planned meticulously. He waited for the right moment. He included his family, not because he was reckless, but because he'd figured out how to do it safely. His courage wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. He was brave, but he was also smart about when and how to be brave. And third, collective vision. Robert Smalls never saw his freedom as separate from his community's freedom. He could have escaped alone. It would have been easier, faster, safer. But he brought 15 people with him, and after he was free, he didn't just enjoy his own success. He went into politics to change the system for everyone. He created schools, he fought for land redistribution, he served in Congress for a decade. His transformation wasn't just personal, it was communal. And here's why this matters right now in your life. You might not be facing the kind of oppression Robert Smalls faced, but you're facing something. We all are. Maybe it's a system that seems designed to keep you out. Maybe it's a limitation that everyone tells you is permanent. Maybe it's a dream that seems impossible given where you're starting from. Robert Smalls' story tells us that the gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't a wall. It's a distance that can be crossed through patient observation, strategic courage, and collective vision. You don't need superhuman abilities. You need to pay attention to the system you're in. You need to be smart about when and how to take risks. And you need to remember that your transformation is connected to other people's transformations. When you rise, you can bring others with you. Robert Smalls was born in a slave cabin behind a house he didn't own. He died in that same house as its owner, having served as a Union captain and a United States Congressman. He transformed himself from property into a political leader. He turned his oppression into education. He used his courage strategically, and he spent his entire life fighting not just for his own freedom, but for everyone's freedom. So here's my question for you. What system are you inside right now that you think you can't change? What limitation have you accepted as permanent? What dream have you given up on because the gap between here and there seems too wide? Share your thoughts in the comments. What's the one limitation you're ready to challenge? What's the system you're ready to study? What's the risk you're ready to take strategically? Because transformation isn't magic, it's not luck, it's patient observation, strategic courage, and collective vision. And if Robert Smalls could do it under conditions we can barely imagine, then you can do it too.